Get done quick.
Get this over with. There's only maybe one controversy in the pack that I saw, so we'll see.
We'll see how that goes.
We could go out and look at a map on the wall. Wouldn't do us any good.
Well, that damn thing's so old.
Mature.
Mature, yes.
Yeah, well, you'll get old and like not like that.
All right, folks. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome. I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Hope everyone had a wonderful holiday season, and thank you all for your time and being here today. So let me start off with a purpose statement. The purpose of the primary objective of the CAC is to ensure capital maintenance and public transportation projects and programs approved by the voters in November 2nd, 2004, November 6th, 2012, and November 7th, 2017 ballot measures are accomplished with PPRTA funds. The committee reports directly to the PPRTA Board of Directors. Anybody want to make any changes? No. All right. Right now, at this moment, all alternates can vote unless we get some more members in, and Rick will step in at that point. So, do I have a motion for approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Brian, Tom, do you second? Okay. All right. Tom second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. So, election of officers, item number 3. I'm going to let Rick take over.
Okay, item 3 is election of officers, and the CAC bylaws provide that the 3 officer positions should be selected by the CAC at its first meeting in January, and your 3 officers are the chair, the first vice chair, and the second vice chair. So obviously the chair isn't going to ask for nominations for the chair, so I will step in and ask for nominations for the chair for calendar 2020. Yes, sir.
Second.
Okay. Are there any other nominations, or is there a motion to close the nominations?
Move we close nominations.
There's,
Move we close nominations and approve him by acclamation.
okay. Second to that?
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
We have a chair for 2020.
There you go.
Condolences.
I see that train a-coming. Okay, what about the other positions?
That's yours.
Oh. Okay.
You're back to work there, buddy.
Damn it. So I thank you all. I serve at the pleasure of the committee. I'm fortunate, and you all know by now my passion for transportation and stuff in the region, and so after spending many years in the military and taking from communities, it's my opportunity to give back, and I appreciate your confidence in electing me chair again. So I take that with great pride, and thank you very much. Okay, so we'll open the floor for nominations for first vice chair. Cheryl?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to nominate Rob Williams as the first vice chair.
Do we have a second? Okay. Any other nominations for chair? A call for vote for first vice chair of Reb Williams?
I move we close nominations and elect by acclamation Reb Williams.
Do I have a second for that? Tony? All those in favor?
Aye.
We got to do it again, big guy.
turned it down.
We saved some administrative money. They didn't have to make new placards. Yeah, there we go.
Hey, I'll just-
All right, so Reb, second vice chair. I hear nominations for second vice chair.
I nominate Tom.
Okay, we have a nomination for Tom.
Second.
And we have a second for Tom. Any other nominations?
Propose nominations and elect by acclamation.
We have it. And I have a second for that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Choo choo. Way to go, team.
Done and done.
All right. I'm not sure whether it's they really want us to do it or they just don't want to do it themselves. Well, welcome and thank everybody. Okay.
Yes and yes.
All right. Public comments for items not on the agenda. Do the committee members of the committee have any public comments? Jim, welcome. Anybody in the audience have any public comments? Seeing none, we'll move on.
Maybe we could get Jim to give us a little bit.
Oh, yeah, Jim, why don't you, since you formally introduced you last time, but why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're
I
here?
was born in a log cabin in Kentucky.
Oh, yeah.
No,
Nice.
that was somebody else. I'm one of the Air Force people that came to Colorado Springs. Actually, I came to Colorado before that. I've got 26 years in the Air Force. After about 1992, I spent some time in bank marketing and ended up as the marketing and communication director at Ent until I retired from that in 2010. I've been involved with community activities ever since we came to town in 1987, and am finishing up my second term on the PPACG CAC, and I needed something to do. So I followed Jim Godfrey, that's what I did, and so that's where I am.
Welcome, thank you.
Thank
Jim and
you.
I have known each other back from the CAC days years ago when he was representing the military community before they expanded the membership, and so go back a few years. So welcome, and we look forward to your contributions and input.
And thanks for your long and continued service.
Thank you.
All right, do I have a motion for approval of the minutes of our December 4th meeting?
So moved.
And second, Joan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right, Bev, financial reports. Good news.
Hey, yeah, good afternoon. As you can see on the report, we received $9,713,000, so we were $1,243,000 ahead of our monthly budget, which makes us $9 million over the annual budget, with November and December still, that could make it even more over budget. So, and I hear that sales were good at the mall, the Chapel Hills Mall in December, so, if that's any indication of sales in Colorado Springs, that'd be great. So, then compared to last year, on the second page, we're ahead $5,259,000, or 6.08%. Now, it looks like to me that unless we go negative compared to budget in November and December, we will have enough revenue over budget to make the rest of the $10 million payment to CDOT. So we won't have to deal with it next year, hopefully. Okay. Any questions?
Any questions for Bev?
Should we just maybe save the next year and put the interest?
Yes.
If we have the option.
Actually, I would just love to get that paid off.
Yeah, I think the board would as well.
Yeah,
based
because
on
then we
comments.
can kind of go back to budgeting
Without this looming over our head. Yeah, exactly.
anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What does your crystal ball say?
All right, we'll move on to item 7, capital maintenance and public transportation contract, City of Colorado Springs. Welcome, Mike.
Bill Coleman.
Good afternoon, Mike Chabas, City Engineering. I hope everyone had a good Christmas and New Year. I made a New Year's resolution that I wasn't going to take any guff, but
Good luck.
but I don't know if that'll work.
Where's your flak vest?
Yeah. No, I've enjoyed working with you guys. Ladies and gentlemen, have actually been fun to work with, and no.
He's trying to soften.
Oh, if I was quitting, no. No, it has been enjoyable. I appreciate it. I appreciate your guys' effort to, just be responsible with our program.
Tell us what he really thinks.
Yeah. All right, I have several items that we're going to go through. The first item we have is a design contract for the railroad bridge over Fontanero Street over there by I-25. There are two bridges there, a main line and the siding. Those bridges were temporarily short a few years ago because they're under-designed. And so we are actually looking at doing an evaluation of both bridges. We're using the main line is an A-list and the siding is a B-list. We're using emergency bridge fund to help supplement this because we need to evaluate both bridges at the same time. They're both don't have adequate clearance, so when we go to build one, we're actually going to have to do both. It's kind of like we've had some other bridges where you've had two bridges, but it's really impractical to replace one and not the other, or fix one, not the other. So at this point, what we're looking at doing is an evaluation of both bridges to see what we do. We may end up with a recommendation that we build one bridge and two separate ones. So that's what that contract is about.
So this one is design only, Mike?
Yes, design only.
Will the railroad play any part in this once the design is completed? Will they have any contribution to the?
I do not believe they will on this one since it is our bridge. We came after they did, so there's an agreement with the railroad where we're responsible.
Mr. Chair, I had a couple questions about
I'm
this
sorry,
project.
go ahead, Carlos, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. So, Mike, this is the siding is a B-list project, and this is a design for both of the bridges to be replaced?
Yes. Well, for this first part is an evaluation of what do we have and what do we need to do.
An evaluation is not a design?
No, I mean,
I heard the word design.
We will move to design more than likely, but first we got to just assess them and see what we have.
So is this a kind of a preliminary assessment that leads into the design?
Yes,
Okay, and this design, would it include both bridges being replaced simultaneously?
Yes, it could. Like I said, we're not sure. The recommendation may be that we build one bridge instead of two bridges.
Well, it's just kind of the awkwardness of a B-list project with an A, and so...
yes, and we've run into this with bridges because
right.
I think the way we made our list is if we had a bridge or like Platte one, one side was worse and we needed to put it on as a priority, but we knew the other one was soon to follow, and that's why we have the emergency bridge program because we have, from a safety standpoint, we may have a bridge which is a B list, but if it needs to be replaced or goes south on us, we have to fix it. We can't.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, it's just a technicality and awkwardness that we have a B-list item. But if we're going to replace them simultaneously and we have a B-list and an A-list, it seems like the design would include only one bridge, at least as far as the, promises made, promises kept philosophy that we're going to finish the A before we move on to the B, but here we have a need to accelerate a B-list item. Now, I understand. I mean, it's just kind of a predicament we're in. On paper, really we have one bridge that's on the A list and not the B. I'm just pointing that out for understanding.
But if the city has an emergency bridge fund, would you be sharing the cost of the design and construction between the emergency bridge and the PP?
Yes.
Okay. So they're getting funds.
And we're going to address this in the next round.
Yeah, and we do have that capability. It's just, but then it would be moot. We'd be, we're done with the B-list item, and therefore, we checked off a B-list item, but we did it under another an A-list. So it's just kind of a quirk with how the ballot measures there, and as long as we're addressing it properly, I appreciate that. As long as the voters understand that we're moving something up in a way that gets it done earlier, I think that's good. Thank you.
Any other questions on that project, Reb?
Mike, I have, I guess, an exception. First of all, Carlos, I'd like to stand corrected if Rick can tell me. I think the board has already approved that they do two bridges at a time. So it's been, when I say two bridges, at that time, it wasn't even known. But it was like 2 or 3 months ago that they approved these two? No, these two. He presented it.
What they approved was the concept of going forward, looking at this. They haven't
Design.
seen the details.
No. But what I take exception to is the use of the word emergency. This, according to your paperwork, says you knew about this in 2011 and did some shoring work and was, the replacement was discussed in 2011, which was prior to the 2012 ballot, although it was during the process of creating that ballot measure. So, as a general public, I consider yourselves the uninformed. How would you look at it if it was said emergency? Because I think of things like the Chestnut Street Bridge. All of a sudden, there's a big sinkhole in front. That's an emergency. This was not an emergency if you knew about it roughly 10 years ago.
What we have in the description of the emergency bridge program description is that it is, if, for emergencies like Chestnut, but if nothing comes up that we need to address immediately, then we will use it on the highest needed bridges. And this railroad siding is a concern because, we have to shore it temporarily. It is not designed fully. So if we don't have something that's actually falling down, then we look at our highest risk bridges and use the emergency bridge fund instead of just hanging on to it. That's the philosophy there.
Yeah, I actually appreciate that the city is looking to try to do these at the same time. I think it'll be a huge cost savings to the taxpayers with an economy of scale of designing and building both of these at the same time.
Any other questions on that one? Okay, thanks, Mike. Number 2.
Next item, we have a construction contract for Pyramid Construction to do the Barnes Road widening. That's between Solar Ridge and Powers. That project entails not only widening the road, but we're going to actually lower the grade because it's too steep and there's going to be a signalized intersection in the future. We actually got very good bids on this. We were expecting bids to be closer to 3.5, so we're pleased with this. We were kind of concerned that prices keep coming in. This project also is kind of on a fast track. We need to get going on it because we need to get it done so that 2C can come and do the final paving next fall, this coming fall in 2020.
Mike?
Go ahead, Joe.
In your coordination with CDOT, my recollection doing the public involvement on Powers environmental assessment, there's an interchange scheduled for that. Did CDOT give you any indication of when that might occur?
I know, but nothing in the short term. And we actually we're not going all the way to Powers. We're pretty much tying into the existing leg of Powers or Barnes at Powers with all turn lanes. Basically, we're going to match into that and really not go to the actual intersection.
Thank you. Yeah, but they have.
Number 3. Okay, wait a minute. Rick?
Just kind of a sidebar on that. I mentioned the lanes at Barnes there and Powers, how they're not marked properly. You end up in the wrong lane.
Was that Powers or Dublin? I thought.
No, that's, maybe.
It was Dublin.
I'm sorry, you're right. It is Dublin. That is Dublin. I apologize. Has that been addressed at all?
No, we'll talk about it. I drove that last night, taking my daughter's friend back to her house, and they come in, and I remember that it is a little tricky, so we'll look at that.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Next item we have is construction management contract for AECOM for the Barnes Road widening. Now, what we did there, we didn't have, anticipated the fee to be over 200,000, but we didn't really have time to do a full RFP, so what we did is an informal RFP. We sent out requests for qualifications to 3 firms, picked AECom, and are using the on-call contracts to assign them the work. So we issued an on-call task order for 200,000, and then what we're doing is actually bringing the modification to you for the remainder of the contract per the new purchasing rules that we came up with last year. We can exceed a task order, but if it meets a certain threshold, it needs to come to the CAC and board for approval. So this one is exceeding that, so we're bringing it to you for approval. And again, that was done just mainly because we have to get this project going as soon as possible in order to meet the deadline.
So just so I understand, from what I read, 200,000's already been,
Yes, we issued a task order.
and this is for an additional.
145.
Okay.
And like I said, we have our little checklist of, it's allowed, but if it exceeds the 200, we bring it to the board.
And what's the estimated length of this particular project that they're having to manage?
You mean like physical?
Time-wise.
We need to get it done by August or September so that the 2C can come and pave it.
Gotcha.
And there's like a 7-foot cut, so it's
Yeah.
kind of become a pretty good-sized project.
And it's needed.
Any other question on that one? All right, so the next item is a design, or it's actually a study for the intermobility plan. So that's basically an assessment and study of the major corridors in the Springs. We came to the board previously asking that the city had $500,000 of general fund, and we didn't think we would really be able to get a significant amount of work done, so we got approval to supplement that with 500,000 of RTA funds. So what this will do is they will look at all the major corridors, they'll look at some of the previous studies, update them, and start coming up with recommended projects, whether they be a full corridor project or it might be a series of intersection improvements that are needed. It'll be a combination of things for the short term and also long term.
Tom?
So you went to what board, and they said it would be okay to ask for $500,000?
The CAC and RTA.
Is this, when I looked on the list, this wasn't on our list of approved uses of funds.
It's using one of the program funds, and I think it's the roadway and safety operations, I believe. And so I did come to the CAC and board several months ago because we wanted to get an initial, indication on whether that they would approve that, because we didn't think $500,000 would really be able to do the study adequately.
Brian? Well, that was kind of my question is, this is identified as capital funds. And I'm kind of curious as to how a transportation mobility plan is defined as capital.
It's definitely not maintenance, because I said that it's coming up with future projects that are needed, or analysis safety. It'll look at, and I left the scope of work, but it'll look at safety issues. It'll look at high accident locations and what if we need to do anything.
Oh, I understand that the purpose of
Basically is a traffic study, which we've done with the program funds. We've done lots of traffic studies or corridor studies with the program funds.
And the program funds are capital and not maintenance?
Yes. Yeah, like I said, this is, I believe, it's using,
I'm just seeing the kind of the issue we've been running into time and again with the definitions of what is and kind of the slushy nature of program funds.
Well, like I said, it is coming out of the roadway safety and traffic operations, and we have used RTA
I know
for
we have.
studies.
That's the problem with precedents. Yeah.
All right, so, Carlos, go ahead.
Sorry, just briefly. Yeah, I'm just going back to my records. We did approve a line item transfer. This is what Mr. Chavez is referring to, from the Milton Proby project to this capital fund. We approved that here. The CAC and the board did approve that on May the 1st. So we have, the funds were approved so for this project.
Mike,
Yeah, so, go ahead, Rod.
question, you described this as an intermodal mobility plan. Just what intermodal things are you looking at? I know it's a highway project for highways. What else?
Well, the city has a complete street ordinance where when we look at streets, we look at what is needed for motorists and pedestrians and cyclists. So that's just kind of the way we've been looking at these. We don't just widen or do just straight,
Okay.
traffic improvements, because the voters actually and the citizens of the Springs want us to look at, intermodal forms.
Now I understand your point. I'm more used to, if it's intermodal, we're talking about highways or automobiles, vehicles, mass transit, even rail.
Yeah, well, and transit is also, I failed to mention
Okay.
that. So it's transit,
Okay.
pedestrian, and cycling.
Yeah. Thank you.
Rick, did you want to say something before I did? All right, so here's my concern. In the RTA establishing IGA, Section 4, it talks about that RTA funds are limited to roadway capital improvements, maintenance, operations, and transit services, and it goes on. Transportation planning is clearly responsibility of PPACG in their long-term transportation plan and in the TIP. The TIP is more close in, the long-range transportation plan is out further. And my concern is we're spending $500,000 out of a program fund that we've already gotten scrutiny and stuff from the board on how some of these funds are being spent, to do something that's not authorized by our establishing IGA for this large sum of money. I know we've got precedents of some smaller studies we've done. We're looking at the Bijou Street interchange or Platt Avenue interchange thing, and we're doing some other smaller studies. But we're spending $1 million on transportation planning, and of which we're contributing $500,000 out of a program fund as part of capital, and I got a problem with that, and it's not an RTA function to do planning, and that's clearly as I said, clearly in the purview of the PPACG, and matter of fact, and as I talked to Rick earlier. Our A-list projects are included in the ACG TIP, the Transportation Improvement Plan, which is a more short-term part of the long-range plan. And so, based on what I've read in this note, I don't see the justification to spend $500,000 of our program funds for intersection improvement for a transportation study. There are other means and methods to do that. I'm glad that the city's stepping up for half the cost out of their general fund, but I've got a problem based on what I've read and what's been presented. So I'm just sharing my thoughts. Carlos?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of return back to the president's. The Ivy Wild transportation study or traffic study, that was the amount of about $120,000. That was approved by this committee, also by the board. Manitou Springs, with their mobility study, $85,000. So we have the president's. I'm not sure how this differs from, we have $85,000, dollars that we spent for a mobility study for Manitou Springs, but somehow the city of Colorado Springs does not. Something that's different about this. So I'm a little troubled by that, by the. We have the presidents for doing these studies, and that Colorado Springs does not really is worthy of receiving this money, just like our Ivy Wild in Manitou Springs. So I'm a little concerned about that. We're changing direction. And we also did approve a line item transfer specifically for this project. And so seems like we're reversing course.
One of the things
Just my comment.
we do have the Platte Avenue corridor study, which is an A-listed name project. And this is very similar to that.
But not an A-listed.
It's not, it's not a listed project.
Tom?
We have to be careful, I recognize what you're saying, but we have to be careful that we take precedent as policy. We may have made some decisions before in smaller dollar amounts. This finally raises to the level of, is this a bad precedent to follow? And I share Jim's concern that we are not in the planning business here. We're in the construction and maintenance business. And I understand you have to have good plans to be able to begin this whole process and everything, but that comes before it becomes a PPRTA issue.
Well, then why did we as a committee then approve a line item transfer from the Proby project specifically for this back in May? Again, we're being consistent with our application. The time to raise these concerns was at the time when we approved a line item transfer for the specific project back in May.
Didn't have much detail of that.
We didn't have.
Yes, I have the memo right here. It says the intermodal mobility transportation study. I have the memo right here if Mr. Sonnenberg wishes to make copies of it and distribute it. But nothing that has been raised so far changes what we decided back in May. That's my point.
Rick, you have?
My 2 points would be, first, that the PPRTA 2 A list contains 3 studies with the exact word of study. There's in the regional collaborative projects, and I made enough copies to hand out if the chair so deems. Stapleton Briar Gate corridor study is in the collaborative. There's the Platte Avenue corridor improvement study, and there's the Shooks Run Bridge corridor study. So my conclusion, my interpretation is that the voters are comfortable with studies in capital, because there are 3 capital projects, voter approved, that are called studies. The second point is that the voters also approved about 10 City Colorado Springs program funds. Roadway safety and traffic operations is one of the 10. You're probably familiar with the others. So would the voters be upset, since they already approved 3 capital studies, would they be upset that in one of the 10 program funds that there's a capital study? And so each person can interpret what they would like. My interpretation is that the voters would not be upset with a study, since they've already approved 3 of them by name, that they would not be upset with a study being included in a voter-approved program fund.
That's a good point. Scott?
I guess I would just add on to what Carlos has brought us to attention. We gave the city indication that we were okay with this by approving the line item transfer, and based on that information, the city developed a scope of work and put it on RFP. So now that the contract's here, to go back on our word and say, oh, no, we didn't really mean that, we disagree now, puts the city in a real tough spot. And if we didn't agree with using these funds for study, I agree May was the time to say, no, you can't use the funds then, not to let them go down the road, do a selection process, have a contract in hand, and then say, no, never mind, we disagree now.
Rick?
I'd like to ask a question. I don't expect any of you to step up and admit you did or did not vote, but if you made a bad decision in the past, you can live with that. But if you continue making it, in other words, if you decided now this is too much for a study, I'm not afraid to admit that I might have voted for it. or whatever, and for whatever reason, Carlos refers to us approving it prior, I'm openly admitting, I don't remember, quote, the discussion that went around. I do remember a $1 million grant to the study of Pikes, or Platte Avenue, with a comment that several of you made, well, how are you going to, how are you going to tie it into Interstate 25? Because that was the whole purpose of it originally, as explained to me. Platte would be our main east-west corridor through the city. And there were other studies, Constitution was one and some others. But I don't know. It sounds to me like several of you have said, well, we've made precedent.
I hate to jump in here, but again, the genesis of this particular intermodal mobility study or transportation plan comes from Plan COS, which is the comprehensive plan that was passed by City Council, Colorado Springs. If you go back, I did reread Plan COS and looked at the strong connections. Specifically, this is called out Intermodal Mobility Transportation Plan. And it does call out as one of the items an east-west mobility study is included as part of that. So some of these concerns about east-west mobility and regional transportation issues is called out in Plan COS. It's been very informative, and I do encourage everyone to reread the sections there in Plan COS and to learn more about what it is that the city is committed to as per Plan COS in our comprehensive plan.
I think that probably what Rick put across to us kind of takes it off the precedent aspect of it and puts it into the voter-approved concept that they have already approved, like for studies and the program funds, and that I think that because we've already assessed the project back in May, and the fact that we're not really setting precedent, we're just following what the voters have already approved on the sidelines, that this shouldn't be an issue.
Cheryl?
Having read and participated in many studies, I will say that I think their voters would recognize and approve this intermodal study that's before us today. And number one, because it might obviate the need to do a project A and substitute something else or put it on a lower list or raise a project in the B list because of the outcome of the study, because of shifting populations and how fast our growth is and how dynamic the city of Colorado Springs and outlying areas are, that you're really doing improvements, highway and maintenance work in the dark. And so this study will give us an opportunity to really look and see if what 5 years ago or 10 years ago we really need today. So I think it's a good idea. I don't think that, that there is precedence in those smaller studies, but I think this, under this program fund that Mike is proposing, that it would not be objectionable to the city of Colorado Springs voters.
Okay, and I'll just make one plan and one comment. You've all made really good points, and I get it. While some of the other studies were specific, Platte Avenue corridor study, this, that, another, in my opinion, based on what I've read and heard here, this is a more broad general plan, which in my opinion falls under PPACG and not RTA execution because it's not limited to a specific corridor. That was my point. And so, but that's okay. You've all made good points, and we'll all consider that when it comes time for voting. So, Joan, did you have a question on this one?
No, not a question, but I concur with your thinking on this. That this really belongs to
Okay. I'm gonna have Todd Frisbee, our traffic engineer, talk about that because I think the split between what PPACG does and what a city needs to do is, I think, a little bit more defined.
Todd Frisbee, City of Colorado Springs Traffic Engineering Division. I want to just address the question about transportation planning. historically the way it works is, PPACG does their long-range plan for 2040, and that's usually a 2045 horizon. Both the city and the county do their own transportation planning as well for a couple of reasons. One is to help us to narrow in that list of projects. Cheryl described it well, that with shifting populations, you do a 25-year plan, population changes, population moves, and what you thought you needed 25 years from now, you may need in 10 years from now. So the Intermodal Transportation Plan will give us an opportunity to put together project lists 10, 15, 20 years as we as the city looks forward and tries to use taxpayer dollars the best they can for transportation improvements. And so we're all, the city's always doing their own transportation planning, and that's why we do these studies. That's why we have the program funds, so we can study and get the right set of improvements moving forward on projects. And so I just wanted to address that point that, when it comes to transportation planning, we have a transportation planning group that does this stuff, and I'm part of that group, and that's our role in the traffic group. So just wanted to address that.
Thank you, Todd. Tom?
Is this an update to an existing plan?
I'm glad you asked the question. Yes, the last plan we did was in 2001, so it's been 18 years. Or 19 years since we last updated.
So who paid for the last one? The city did, I assume.
Likely, the city probably. The city paid for that study. Also, as Carlos mentioned, this is in tune with the planned COS that and the goals and the aspirations set in that study. Our efforts here would be to begin to put some fruition and some implementation to the planned COS goals. And also, a major component of this is one of the aspects that's approved by City Council is our major thoroughfare plan, which hasn't been updated 2001, and that's a key tool that we use when we in development planning. When developers come in and they want to build a project, we say, well, this particular road's on our major thoroughfare plan. It's a 4-lane arterial. That's our opportunity to leverage that development to get those types of road improvements in. And if we had that in our thoroughfare plan, which is adopted by council by ordinance, it gives us some teeth to move forward on those types of projects.
Jim, you had your hand raised.
First of all, Rick, you didn't mention this in my orientation. Coming from the PPACG CAC, I'm interested in the perspective here and the division of responsibilities. Because the question when I looked at this memo was, what is the potential influence of this work on PPRTA 3 and the planning and the thinking that's beginning now about that opportunity?
Yeah, and that is a major component of this. Is that in our back of our mind, we're thinking about what's the next list of projects for PPRTA 3. And so this Intermodal Transportation Plan would help the city define what those projects are, prioritize those projects, and start to put together some base cost estimates for those projects. So we feel like this study is a major step toward defining what future city PPRTA 3 projects will be.
And Todd, that's a really good point. And I think that would help sell this a little better, mentioning that this could influence the RTA 3 list and updating this in that, because it's not mentioned in the narrative of the memo. And I think you make a good point there, enough to make me think I want to go with this. But it's just not clear in what I read, and this is what the board members will read and whatnot. So if this is an influencer, I think that's a great motivation. You ought to say that.
And
Robert,
just to make it clear, I happen to be a very, very large supporter of transportation planning. With my time in the Virginia Department of Highways, I was in charge of urban transportation planning. The next post I held was as the executive director of the Richmond Regional Planning District Commission, which in effect is a cog,
Right.
like you have here. And the third, when I was in Federal Highways as an associate administrator, I was in charge of planning. Now, so I am totally a supporter of planning and really of this project. But the thing that is difficult for me coming here is I see capital and I see maintenance. None of that would ever come under, whether it be at the federal, state level, or metropolitan level that I served. And it bothers me when I see projects coming forth that are planning projects out of PPRTA. Then that's the point. And it, in one hand, it almost breaks my heart to be against a project like this. But I really think that if a voter really, no matter whether they're from El Paso County, Monument, or any other place in the El Paso County, the city of Colorado Springs, they're all good, and planning is needed. But I think that the biggest selling point to the citizens is to see transportation projects approved that see something on the ground. If it's going to be, I support the mass transit. I support maintenance of highways. I support construction of highways. And I can go along with some other things, but there are you're correct. There are precedents that have been, things have been done. All I can say is that I hope that I would never have supported that, or never will support that as long as I'm on this organization, because of that concept of mine. And I respect the city a great deal. They've put I believe a penny or something like that on their sales tax, and they are building like hell, and I'm all for them on that. But when it comes to planning, it just seems to me, go ahead and if you can put it under the city's budget somewhere, or give it to the COG. But I do support planning, and I know this needs to be done. It's just a matter of where the money should come from. Thank you.
Ed, one more, and then I think everybody's had a chance to express.
Well, I think based on what Todd has just explained to us, it makes a whole lot of sense. I think that's what needs to go forward to the board. It's very palatable to me in the way it's explained. The future, coming up with PPRTA 3, love the whole concept, and I can understand where we're at now since we're going back to 2001.
Yeah, and I would just say that third paragraph where you talk about the robust public involvement, it was pointed out, could lead to or could influence or empower the RTA 3 list or something. I think it would make a better tie verbally. So.
Sure, yeah, we do have a fairly extensive public involvement process planned with this.
Okay, any other questions on this one? We'll move on. Thank you all for your comments.
Okay. All right. Next item I have is a change order for AECom to do some utility design work on the Centennial Extension project. That actually is an expense that will be reimbursed by CSU. And so they're upgrading their facility, and they need to tie that into our project. Then, any questions on that one? Next one is on the list is the UPRR Nevada and Tejon contract. We've got a short presentation on that that I was going to have Aaron just go through quickly, but I was wondering, do you want to do that now, or should I just skip to the next two and then do that? You guys?
You might want to see what Aaron has to say on this. We've had some discussions on this in the past. at the risk of insulting you and your time, is there any consternation on what we're doing here? I think an update on this is good. We've got the time if you want to do it. So, Aaron, how long you got? A couple minutes? Okay. You do it now versus going and do the other two. Is that okay with you guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, wait.
There you go.
Why don't you drive?
This is a key part of that north-south.
Clicker, are you moving the slides? The arrow's not keyboard. There we go. Aaron Egbert, City of Colorado Springs. We're moving to the next phase of preliminary design on this project. As you may be aware, may not, when we developed the PPRTA 2 ballot-listed projects, these railroad bridges did bubble up as a big concern, but we didn't know how to quantify them from a cost estimate standpoint or where to put the bridges. So we put in a design-only phase for that. So that is the A-listed project. Wanted to kind of give you an update of some of like 4 or 5 of these alternatives that we've gone through. I've got some costs, and I'll show you the preferred alternative that we're moving forward with. So the purpose, the Tejon Bridge is 115 years old and has definitely reached the end of its service life. It is our consultant's opinion that the Tejon Bridge was constructed by the railroad and is the railroad's responsibility, so they will be participating once we get into the construction of these projects. We'll still have to go fight this out with the Public Utility Commission to figure out their percentage versus our percentage, but they will be an active participant. Some of our goals that we've been dealing with, we've got some issues with some quiet zones that as a city we've been trying to implement along the whole railroad corridor. We've also got some issues with the Burlington Northern has a spur where their maintenance yard is, and then also ultimately the connection of the legacy loop underneath the railroad itself. We're at the end of our level 3 screening, which is where we've selected our preferred alternative and we'll move forward into preliminary design, ultimately final design. So our first option I'm going to show you is what we call H, and there were like 28 or 30 options as we go through here. But this was to attempt to replace the bridges exactly in the location they are today. And really what that did was, and right now there's only about a 12-foot underclearance on Tejon. We got to get to 16.6 to meet legal truck limits. So really you wound up with almost 2 blocks of revisions to Tejon and Nevada to be able to get that roadway down. So this wound up being more expensive than our preferred alternative and got screened out. Our preferred alternative wound up being taking the hump out of the railroad. So we're going to be straightening it out. As far as kind of going from north to south, we will have some quiet zones at Los Animas and Sierra Madre. We'll also be making sure that we can connect the legacy loop under the railroad. And then the Burlington Northern relocation of their yard will be right off of Las Vegas. So this is the preferred alternative that we'll be moving forward with.
Aaron, that eliminates, so you can build that without interrupting traffic on the existing route at this point, or minimize the interruption of traffic. Is that?
That is correct. One of the nice things about this was you're getting far enough away from the main line that you don't need to pay flaggers. You can do most of the construction offline, and then just do maybe an 8-hour closure to make the connections. Now with this option, we did have what could be a future connection once the Drake power plant is decommissioned, where we could swing this main line and push it further to the west onto the Drake site for how that redevelops. So the nice part about this is it did have a phase 1 and a phase 2 depending on how Martin Drake is decommissioned. Then we got into some of the planning crazy ideas here where we kept the main line in the same location, but we pushed it all the way down to the other side of the rescue mission, down to the barrier next to I-25 and the creek. And then that would help. That helped the Mill Street neighborhood not be so disconnected. There was a lot of benefits in this, but as you see, the costs wound up being prohibitive and why it was not selected. We had another option where we really swung the main line onto the Drake property. The difficulty with this is if Drake doesn't decommission until 2035, there's environmental cleanup for 10 years. The soonest we could do something like this would be 2045, and we don't have that much time with these railroad bridges in the condition that they are. So some of the costs. So H wound up being $53 million. M1, the preferred alternative, is $42 million. M2 would be another 47, and that varies just on how many crossings you have, how many grade separated, how that internal traffic network works. N was $111 million, and O was $122 million. So from a city's perspective, 1 year of our PPRTA capital dollars is about $40 million. So that's kind of how we ultimately got to our preferred alternative. With that being said, there's lots of other things that could happen that we may divide up or we may not do it. It might tie into the future transportation plan, but we could swing Las Vegas up, connect it all the way to Cimarron through the Drake property. We could have Rio Grande connect into the Drake, and that would allow us to maybe cul-de-sac Los Animas and Sierra Madre so that we wouldn't need those quiet zones. So those are the kind of things we'll have to kind of figure out what funding source and what pot of money we might implement each of these things with. So with that being said, I will open it up to questions, or I can go back to any other slides that you want.
Scott?
Is CSU on board with the intersection improvements that would be required at Los Animas Street where the railroad crossing is? Because right now it's just kind of a huge expanse of asphalt. And I was actually involved in design probably 10 years ago of both the Sierra Madre and the Los Animas quiet zone crossings. And where it fell apart is CSU was not on board with what we had to do to build an intersection at Los Animas to be able to identify where you could put the quiet zone crossing gates.
Right now, they are on board. They've been part of our team from an economic development. I think at that time, they did not have a firm date to decommission Drake. So I think that decommissioning of Drake has changed their mindset on access to that property. And we're still working with them on a quarterly basis. We're trying to get together, understand how their plans fit with our plans.
Carlos?
Very informative presentation. Thank you very much. So this preferred alternative, this design contract that we have before us, is to work on that design, the preferred alternative option M1. Is that correct? What we're being asked for approval for funding?
That is correct. It's to take that to a preliminary design.
And is there anything that could potentially change that to M1? I know it looks like there may be a few tweaks, a few alternatives to the alternative. Is there anything that would kind of say, nope, M1 is not going to happen, we're going to have to go to another option? It's just pretty much, looks pretty good. I know you guys put a lot of work into it. It looks pretty firm at this point, M1. Is that correct?
It does. We have a meeting with the railroad, both railroads, Union Pacific and Burlington Northern, next week to roll out this M1. They've been very supportive, but until we actually give them a design to look at and lay out, they haven't really given us a ton of comments.
Yeah, I understand. The kind of devil's in the details. Things do change. I understand that. But it looks, I call it an alternative that we can start rallying around, this design, especially as you know from the trail side, Shook's Run, a lot of interest there in connecting the Legacy Loop. Now we have something that we kind of, hang our hat on. So that's good. I'm very, very appreciative of everything that's gone in here and fairly optimistic at where we're at with the design. So thank you very much.
Any other questions? Cheryl?
Aaron, is there a firm commitment by the railroads on the one bridge that you said was, I think it was the Tejon Bridge?
Yeah, we do not have a firm commitment yet, but as we proceed into this, once we have preliminary design, then we can really start having them review and have those conversations of what they would participate in. And then, like I said, it probably, depending on how that conversation goes, the PUC will ultimately help us with the cost sharing for the structures.
Thank you, Aaron. Very informative.
Right.
Yeah, would it be possible for us to get a copy of the presentation you just put out?
Sure, I think so. Do you need? Can they have a copy of the presentation? Yeah, everything's in draft. We've met with the Mill Street neighborhood. We've had conversations with a lot of property owners. We have talked about future property acquisitions and kind of how that, but there is a little bit of a level of concern right now from the neighborhood just on how we're going to acquire those properties and when, because it is going to be out past 2025 before we do have any construction dollars, potentially.
Okay.
So be sensitive with that, I guess, is what I'm saying.
I appreciate that.
Aaron? I have a question. You've referred to
Yes,
the
sir.
bridges at Fontenarrow as UPPR, and you refer down here to the bridges being Burlington Northern. Okay?
It's very complicated.
Well, that's what I was asking you to explain, because literally, you're dealing with two railroads, is my understanding.
We are.
And they're a hard,
So Union Pacific owns the right-of-way. And Burlington Northern leases the tracks and the bridges from Union Pacific. So Burlington Northern has been maintaining the tracks now, replacing bridges up north, those type of things. So yes, we will have to have agreements with both railroads because one's a property owner and one's a leasee.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, next item. Thank you.
Okay, next item is, we have a maintenance contract for operations and maintenance for their chip seal program. Well, the first one's the crack seal program for $1.3 million, and then they have another contract with A1 to do their chip seal program. That's their annual RTA work that they do. I don't know if there's any question on those. I'll have to have Dave come up if there are.
Any questions, anybody? All right. Do I hear a motion to, Scott?
I move to approve all contracts as presented.
Second. A second by Tony. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
I would like to take one item out, just, it's for you.
No, I'm okay with not taking it up.
I just want to point out the difference of opinion and how you just want, you're going to explain it to her.
Oh, so Rev is suggesting maybe remove one. I've been turned around on the subject. I'm okay with including it as a list if that's all right with everybody else.
Yeah, as long as, you can maybe help the board by giving them the essence of our
Yeah,
discussion.
I'll do that. Okay, okay, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. All right, item 7B, Jennifer.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Mr. Chair, Committee, Jennifer Irvin, County Engineer. I just wanted to note, I did hand out some additional items, and those would be heard under 7C. So just want to make sure you're not confused. First item we have is related to the contract item, one of the contract items we have later in your agenda packet. But this first item is a budget increase request and a line item transfer, transferring from the El Paso County Eastonville Road project to fund the budget increase for the Meridian McLaughlin Roundabout. So typically, we have not come back to this body or the Board of Directors unless, once and unless we have a good idea of additional funding we need for each project, and that's what we are doing here today. We have advertised the Meridian McLaughlin Roundabout project and received the bid and found that we need to increase that budget. So on the second page of the memo, we kind of go through all of the project expenses that we have for the Meridian Roundabout project. And this project was designed in-house by staff, but we did have some small purchase orders earlier, starting in 2018, for property acquisition, utility relocation, and some lighting design, which we are not the experts at, which is why we needed some assistance there. And then also the property purchase, and then the construction management, I came to you last month. And then finally, our construction contract. So as we receive that construction contract, the contract amount for just the construction alone is about $3.7 million, and our current total project budget is about $2.36. So we are asking to transfer about $2.85 million from the Eastonville Road project to make sure that we can move forward with this project. And what that does is that transfers enough to fund the contract, the construction contract, but then also leave us a small contingency of about $750,000 in case we have any additional items in there. So we are requesting approval for that, and I would note that, this is not unusual, as we have done preliminary estimates on many of our projects. Some of them are above what we anticipated, some of them are below. In this case, this one was above.
Carlos?
I did say before the meeting I had lots of questions on
Sure.
this. Thank you very much. I wanted to go, actually, construction costs for the roundabout, the Meridian McLaughlin roundabout. I went back and looked at some other roundabouts that we've been doing. The Tejon roundabout comes in, the construction was $1.6 million. The Printers Parkway, about 1.9, I think it was. Actually, if you look back at the Tejon, if you look at the construction manager, it was about a little over $2 million. We see a construction contract of 3.7. It's about 2x what we're seeing for. And I guess let me put a little bit more context. I guess the conventional wisdom is that ex-urban rural infrastructure will be cheaper than infill development in the city for like the Tejon five-way intersection is about 100 years old. So this kind of turns it on its head that we see something that's close to greenfield development being twice as expensive as infill development. Now, I realize there's a lot of factors on here, but can you kind of walk me through? This is not something I would expect, that we would see this much more expensive than urban infill roundabouts.
So I can't talk to the city's projects. I'm not intimately knowledgeable about those projects. But I would say that if you look at the Falcon area, this is definitely what I would consider somewhat infill. This area in this area of Falcon is definitely significantly urbanized. We have curb and gutter. And if you look at the property purchases that we had to acquire, we had 14 parcels adjacent to this roundabout. So it's a pretty significant location. Many times at an intersection you have maybe 5 to 6 property owners right at a corner. In this case, we have small properties. This area was platted in the 1800s, and so we had several properties to acquire from. I can't speak to the cost of the city's projects in relationship to because I'm not intimately involved in their projects, but we have gone through. What I would say is that this roundabout also requires some approach, addressing some of the approach roadways, both for Old Meridian Road and then McLaughlin Road at this location. And so we have to not only address the roundabout itself, but also addressing some of the approach roadways, and some of that area needs to be realigned and then reconstructed.
Jennifer, it might be helpful if the members look at the item we have coming up, because there's a map attached, and it does help put it a little bit into context. I did have some concerns about the cost as well, but having been out in this area quite a bit, I'm very familiar with what's going on out there, and this does really help contextualize the reasons for the cost.
Scott?
Is this a one-lane roundabout or a two-lane roundabout?
It's a one-lane.
Okay.
Ed?
But what I would also say is that the approach leg from the looking at, as you go, if you're looking at, and thank you, Brian, if you look at the project in and of itself, the approach lanes on the north side as it ties into Rolling Thunder, and it's not labeled on there, but it's kind of the easterly portion of that roundabout, it goes into a 4-lane roadway. So we're having to do some transitioning there. And then what we're also doing is that we're tying in all of the pedestrian improvements at that location. We also have some significant drainage to address at that location to accommodate the drainage. What you don't see, because I had my staff kind of adjust the map from last time because it was a little bit confusing. There's drainage that goes across a New Meridian Road that has to accommodate the drainage from the roundabout in and of itself to the detention facility that's kind of there.
That
you
retention
can kinda
pond's just
see.
south of there, right?
Yeah,
Of
to
New
the
Meridian.
south. So we have some extensive drainage work to do to really accommodate all this. And what I would say, too, is that just as you look at this intersection, if you've been out there and it's a little bit hard to see, today it's kind of a weird three-way intersection. We've had some significant safety issues at that location. And then, so we are really trying to, kind of essentially rebuild this entire intersection and then all the approaches.
Yeah, Jennifer kind of addressed what I was getting into. The drainage issue in previous meetings was substantial, and I think that was further reaching than just the roundabout, and I'm guessing that's included in this part of the budget?
Correct.
So that's going to be a whole lot more than anything in town that we're used to seeing.
Yeah, I'm just going to have to disagree with and I have Google Earth here, and I'm looking at this is clearly exurban, rural type of area. I mean, I know there's a lot of cars, a lot of houses there, but it's nothing like what you would see as infill, like Tejon to 5-way. But we'll agree to disagree. In your memo, you refer to the New Meridian Road as failing. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
So are you talking, because I'm speaking right now to the reconstruction, I mean the line item transfer. Are you talking to the...
I might be a little bit ahead. I'm on item.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm looking at them all together, but the first, I think it's page 2, but I'll tell you what, we can wait on that until we'll discuss that, but there is a note here.
Let's do 7B, which is the line item transfer first, as that may impact 7C. So, any other questions on the line item transfer? Do I have a motion to recommend Ed and Rick? Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, 7B, recommend approve. 7C.
So 7C is, as we discussed a little bit last time, what we're trying to do is be efficient with some of our monies out there in this area, and along with the roundabout, which we kind of discussed a little bit, but we have a contract for about $3.87 million. We also, when we bid this project, added in from the maintenance side, a reconstruction of that New Meridian extension. And so we're recommending a contract to Kiewit for a total of $5.26 million. And that includes both the $3.7 million for the roundabout and then for the approximately 5 for the New Meridian reconstruction, which is actually maintenance funds. So, and we will be tracking that separately. We want to have one contractor do all the work. Number one, because of the phasing, and number two, because of the efficiency of doing that work. And then it just to try to make sure that we are using the money as efficiently as possible. We are overseeing it with one construction management firm, and that's what I brought to you last month. And to address the asphalt, we have done cores of the asphalt out at that location from that extension project, and that was built in 2004 with the developer. What we found is that we can't not just overlay that. If you look at the asphalt, the road has not been opened, but what happened is that there is wide cracks in that asphalt, and so we have growth coming through that asphalt, and then we done some evaluation of that asphalt, and we can go ahead and do an overlay on that roadway, But what would occur is that it's going to fail twice as fast. And it only has a life of about 10 years. So rather than spend about $500,000 to $600,000 to do an overlay, we are looking to do a reconstruction of that asphalt. And so taking out the asphalt, putting in good bed, and then laying down new asphalt on that reconstruction area.
And Jennifer, just as a refresher, this was a result of the subsurface conditions and the drainage in that area, if I remember correctly. Is that correct?
That's a couple of several factors, but yes, mainly, yeah.
All right, Scott, you good? Carlos had his hand up, I think, and then Rick. Go ahead, Carlos.
The new Meridian Road, it failed after 16 years. What is the expectation or standard by El Paso County for the lifespan of a road before it needs to be replaced or repaired significantly?
The design element of that, the design, usually we look at a 20-year design life. And then, dependent on the type of maintenance that we are able to do with our limited budget, usually you're doing maintenance at year 3, year 7, and other years. It just depends.
So this failed before is expected or anticipated design of 20 years, which is the standard, correct? It failed before then. I just want to understand the factual information.
Sure.
It lasted 16 years. Now we have to put in $1.4 million to remediate this particular road. I just want to understand the facts.
That is correct. I mean, our anticipated design, and that's typically what we would do. I would also note that this roadway was built and constructed by a developer with different design criteria that we have today. If you look at our design criteria, what this road has is full depth on native soil, which is what is located there. And our criteria today, because we know that that's not lasting as long, is a asphalt on some kind of base, which we have found to see and see that is lasting longer. And so what I don't want to do is just mill that road and then continue on, because we will receive the reflective cracking come back through. We're going to take the roadway out. We're going to put in the appropriate base, and we're going to put in the new asphalt so that we don't see that, so that we hopefully can achieve those 20-year lifetime design. So,
Rick?
I just wanted to clarify that this new Meridian's never been open. It's just laid there and deteriorated over the years.
Yeah.
So it was substandard to start with. Second of all, is this the final on the design and layout of everything?
from a high level, yes.
Okay. And then do you have a timeline of when your construction's starting and that sort of thing?
Once we award the contract, we will have those discussions with the contractor. One of the things I mentioned last time is that we are trying to award both this and the intersection improvement and the South Meridian all at once. Because that project has some federal funding, we ran into a snag with CDOT as far as timeline, and so I'm hoping that I will bring that to you next month. And then we'll be looking at when we coordinate that construction project. And what I'd like to do is make sure that they kind of get underway at the same time, so that we're working those projects together.
I thought you'd already put an RFP out on that.
We did,
Yep.
and we're ready to award. We hit a snag with CDOT in regards to the award, so I'm hopeful that we have to have approval from them to go ahead and award the contract for that other project, but we don't have that quite yet.
Okay, thank
Just
you.
tell them we'll pay off the $10 million early.
Different project.
Rev?
Jennifer, do you have all the property acquisition for the roundabout? It's complete now?
We have one property that we still have to get an easement for, but the overall project is where we're doing the work is complete. The reason why we don't have that one property is because it is held by an LLC that is no longer active, and so we are working to resolve that through the courts.
How much money? I mean,
Not significant.
okay.
We've already put that into our estimates, and that's part of the reason why we have some contingency.
You can mark this one 7CA, and then her walk on to 7CB. CB.
So typically, we don't really like to do walk-ons, but we are being encouraged by the Board of Directors to go ahead and move quickly on all of our projects and move those ahead as much as possible. So when my staff came to me with a recommendation for award on this contract, what is it, Wednesday or Tuesday? I can't remember. Tuesday, right before the first of the year, I spoke with Mike and also with Rick and asked them if they would be okay if we walk this on. So just wanted to mention, I gave you all a map, and this is really helpful. This project is a project that we have not started, and this would be the first contract for this project. This is an A-list voter-approved project. It's the Briar Parkway Stapleton Road Corridor project. A little bit of history is that this connection has been on the the county's major transportation corridors plan since 1987. It was actually added in 1987 as a project. And so we've been doing several different elements of this project. But if you look at the section from Black Forest Road to Meridian Road, there's some areas that have been developed, and there is some areas that have not. So as we were looking at this, and this has been a big question since I came onto the county since the 2000s, but since 1987, is that what's the exact alignment of Briar Parkway and Stapleton between Black Forest Road? Now, we have some sections that have already been addressed, but we need to kind of go through some virgin ground, and so that was the purpose of this study as the city and the county discussed it, to put on the PPRTA A-list. And this is a city-county joint project that the county is leading. Mainly because most of this area is still in unincorporated El Paso County. But this project, the purpose of it and why we only put a corridor study on the A-list was because this was about a 5-mile distance, and we wanted to make sure that before we put on a project that we hadn't even determined an alignment for, that we got together a good corridor plan. So the purpose of this project is to do corridor planning and preliminary design, and then we would likely look at putting it on maybe if it's determined a PPRTA extension, the next PPRTA extension for design and for further design and construction. Some of this area is being overcome by development, so some of the alignment has been developed through that development, but there's still a significant area that has not yet been determined. And so we need to pick out the best location. We need to confirm the cross-section. We need to confirm, the future long-term planning of 4 or 6 lanes. And so that's part of the purpose of this. And then once we do that, we'll go through, and we'll have some public open houses, and then once we go through that, we'll go through some preliminary design as much as we can. So the overall project budget with total city and the county is about $1.1 million, and the initial contract amount that we are recommending with Wilson and Company is about $410,000.
Rick?
Jennifer, looking at your map, how much of this corridor is inside the city limits now, not was there? In other words, from Meridian Road, or actually it's just east of Meridian Road to Briar Parkway, was significantly county approximately 10 years ago when this study, well, before that, but when you put it onto the list as a joint venture.
It was originally on the county.
It's all still, I believe, I'd have to look to make sure, but we've had some discussion around the Volmer Road area. There's a development there. There has been some discussions for some annexations, namely Sterling Ranch, that is still in the county at this point. Black Forest Road at this point, the county, are working towards conveying that to the city, so Black Forest Road. But if you look at a lot of and you can kind of see the area to the south. It's kind of by a brown line. It's kind of difficult to see, but there's a brown line which shows the current city-county boundary.
The one to the east of Volmer, that boxed off area?
Yeah, it's kind of like hashed.
Yeah.
Got it. I see it.
But we don't know. And what I would say, too, is that the reason why this is kind of a joint project is because, there is some tie-ins at Briargate Parkway. And if you look at the Stapleton Road corridor and the Briargate corridor, this will be a significant roadway. And the reason is because if you look at Briargate Parkway, it goes from I-25. This will go directly through Meridian, past Meridian. It turns into US 24. We did a previous two PPRTA projects, and then that Stapleton corridor turns into Curtis Road. And Curtis Road is right adjacent to Schriever Air Force Base. And so that's this roadway, this corridor is very important to both the city and the county. And then as Curtis Road dips down to the south, Bradley Road then comes back around to the east-west and then hits South Academy near I-25. And so it's kind of a loop around the city and the
Northeastern
county.
side of the city. Well, now that you mentioned Schriever, we ought to put this on the Space Force's budget to pay for that connectivity, right?
I wish. So sorry, I mean, it's a long explanation, but because this is the first step of a new project, and it is a city-county collaboration. We are working with Tim Roberts with the city of Colorado Springs, who is their transportation planner, and we'll continue to work with the city of Colorado Springs. We really feel that this is an important road, and we, the county, have invested a lot of time and effort to make sure that we continue this corridor study and make this great connection.
Okay, Tom, you had a question?
I do. When I was doing commentary for Northcom on developments, Sterling Ranch was one of the areas we talked about. There are about 4 developments right in this area, so much of your road design has already been determined by the developers. So it seems a bit late.
I don't think all of the road design has been done by the developers, and what I want to make sure is that we are looking towards the future and making sure that as future development occurs, we are planning and making sure that we're getting the appropriate right-of-way. Some of the developer is only building certain portions of this roadway, and so we want to make sure if something changes, our corridor plan today shows 4 lanes, but if it makes sense at some point to do 6 lanes, today is now the time to get that done.
Yeah, you're basically going to be connecting the dots because the roadway has already been determined by the developers through this whole center section.
So, no, I mean, there's a center section that has not been developed where it dips down, and that's part of the location that we need to look at. And then we also need to make sure that we have a good plan. They may have started 4 lanes. We need to make sure that we determine and develop the whether it's curb and gutter, whether it's urban, whether it's rural, what that drainage looks like, where the stream crossings, there's 2 bridges out in this location. We need to look at the best location to build that. And then, and I agree, some of this has already been done, Tom, but I don't think it's something that we are wasting money on because
I'm not saying
then
that.
I'm
saying we should have spent it 2 years ago.
10.
1987, yes. But we also need to make sure that because not all of this is the developer responsibility, that we're getting together a good plan and good estimates for whether we look at PPRTA extension, federal dollars, a collaboration between a district. I mean, those are all the elements that we need to do and to make sure that we have a good plan for this road. And I would specifically talk about access management. That's another element of this plan. We need to make sure that we preserve the access along the corridor to make sure that we don't have signals every 500 feet. That is a significant element of this project, and I think will help as future development comes along to give them some understanding and some predictability, which is very important to developers, on where those accesses should go, so that we don't have signals every 500 feet. That's, I think, for me, is primarily a good reason, probably one of the most significant reasons why this is an important corridor study.
Jim, you had a question?
Well, other than being fascinated by, this has been a project thought about since I got here in '87. Jennifer, will this project include, given our recent conversation about the New Meridian Road, will that include an assessment of the quality of what developers have already built in to this corridor?
The corridor study does not, but I anticipate when we get into preliminary design, that is something that we would look at. Yeah.
All right, any other questions on this particular? Good information, Jennifer, thank you. Is that all yours? Those are your three?
Yes.
So, Tony?
I'd like to move for approval of the county's projects, the two projects presented.
And we have a second with Joan. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. Good
Thank
job.
you.
All right, moving right along. 8A, City of Colorado Springs Transit, I didn't see it. Any questions on Colorado Springs Transit report? I don't see anybody here. Mike, you doing it?
Well, no, I think Transit may not have known about this shift of dates, so that's why they're
okay.
not here. That might have been my fault for not letting them know.
Well, I'd like to just point out on the current project status, just again, Tony's our rep to the 2045 Regional Transit Plan. They've got some stuff coming up in January, I believe, as well as the North Nevada Transit Study. There's an open house on January 29th. Hey, it's at the Tap Traders. It's a beer place, okay? Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, for the 2045 Regional Transit Plan and Specialized Transportation Coordination Plan, the last line there tells you it's actually going before the PPACG board meeting this month. Most of the meetings have taken place over the last few months, and I believe we're at the end, that the public comment period is over now.
Okay. All right, any other questions on that? All right. Let's go with 8B, RTA Capital Project Quarterly Status Report.
Okay. John, did you want?
Mr. Chair, with your permission, just real quickly, you're absolutely right. The 2045 Transit Plan and Specialized Transit Plan are going to the board this coming Wednesday, the 8th. As associated with the public involvement that's required by federal regulation, there'll be a call to the audience specific for that item. So if you have any last burning issues that you want to make sure you get on the record, they'll open the public hearing, people will make their comments, they'll close the public hearing, and then we'll have the 2045 transit and specialized transit plans up, hopefully, for adoption for the board, because, as you said, we've been coming to the board every meeting now for the last 3 or 4 months, so hopefully there should be no surprises.
I remember those cycles.
So, and I apologize,
No.
Mr. Chair, for just jumping
No
up.
problem.
So, thank you.
Okay, Mike.
Okay. All right. I'd like to just take a moment to address one of the comments about the cost of the roundabouts. I was looking at the county's map for their roundabout, and the legs that they're working on are much longer than what we did on the Tejon or Printers roundabout. We pretty much just did the roundabout, and as soon as you get past the splitter islands, we just tied it was there. And we didn't really have to do much drainage, so that's probably why there's a difference in cost between what we're doing and this one. This is a much larger project.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So we have brought another update on the RTA A-list projects, and the first two are just some charts that we've been kind of putting that shows our spending levels versus how much money we have. And I think if you look at the first chart, which is the cumulative actuals versus estimates, I think you'll see that in 2019, we had more money in revenues than we were spending. But then we've done some projections out to the end of the program, and you see that the spending starts catching up with the revenues, and basically at the end of the program, we spent what we have collected. So we're going to just continue to show those trends. Same thing with the next chart. You see that our drawdowns for 19, we've got a lot of things on the books, not a whole lot of construction in 19, but in 20 and 21 and 22, we've got a lot of major projects that are going to be in construction, and you see that the expenditures are going to jump quite a bit. So we're just kind of tracking that and projecting what we think will happen, and then that'll become real time from year to year. The next chart or thing is the just kind of our budget projection. There are really no changes to that from last time. And then on the actual schedule, the only really significant change we had was on project number 3, Airport Road. We had that starting and finishing kind of in 2020, but that bridge replacement has triggered some really big utility relocations. We thought we could just kind of dogleg the utilities around the bridge, but that's, as we went through design, that's not feasible. So CSU has quite a bit of work to do. So we, to the tune of around $3 million, which they will be paying for, but that's extending the project because utilities has to do their water line relocations in the winter when water use is at a low demand, but their gas relocations have to be done in the summer. So basically 2020 will be taken up with utility relocations, and then in 2021 we'll do the bridge. That's only really the big change in the schedule from the last report.
Okay, any questions for Mike? Yeah, Rev?
Mike, I'm going to call them page 4 and 5. Is there any way you could make the print larger so us more mature people could read it without a magnifying glass?
Yes, I guess we can print these out at 11 by 17 and fold them.
Okay,
We'll just because that's what I do when I work on them. I get big because I can't see anything. So we'll just make sure that those are 11 by 4 or 11 by 17.
Any questions for Mike on this city's update? Anybody? Jennifer, your update? Not as many projects.
Jennifer Irving, County Engineer. At the previous board meetings, they have asked the county to do a similar, previously we had a text update, and we were asked to do a similar format as the city, which we were happy to do, and so this is our first draft at that, and so I anticipate some updates as we move along and do something different and improve it as time goes along. I would note that we will have a map included in our board packet as well. So just kind of commenting, we have several projects that are going to construction this year, and all of our projects are either complete or substantially complete or underway. We are actually moving in advance of some of the timelines I previously had expected for some of our projects and starting some of those. So I think that we are doing a good job of trying to move forward, and I appreciate your indulgence in adding the item to the board's or your packet today, because that saves us a month as we move the Stapleton project corridor together faster. What I would say is that in looking at the budget projections in the out years, those are very, very high level, because some of these projects we are just getting into the design of or finishing that up. So I don't really like to show those unless I have a good firm grasp on what those budget projections are. So please note that they are probably very high. So I think if you have any specific question about any specific projects, I'd be happy to answer those.
Those are change orders. That's not this. Thank you, Jennifer. The board requested these quarterly updates looking forward to kind of see, and I think, at least for me, visually being able to see when the projected starts are, and that we don't have a whole multitude of projects bumping up into the last year, is reassurance to the board and some of their concerns that they've expressed for the last 4, 5, 6 months. And so I appreciate your work on and you and the city's work on putting this together. And we just have to watch those 2024 projects, make sure that at least fully funded as we go into that year, so we can work on the B-list stuff a little bit. And that's really the focus of the board is RTA 1, we never got to the B-list. They really want to get to the B-list this time around, so that's where they're focusing their attention. So this helps us and them get to that reassurance. So thanks, Jennifer. Any questions?
I have one. Jennifer, Monument Hill Road, the $5 million in 2024, is that from Palmer Ridge High School north? And is that, or does that extend that other parkway?
So as we were doing the original design concept for Monument Hill Road, what we looked at was the highest priority, because what we've been trying to do from a county standpoint is not to significantly go over some of our initial budget projections. And so as we were looking at that, what the transportation study that we did for the entire corridor was showing us is that at some point there may need to be some future improvements at that intersection of Misty Acres Boulevard and Monument Hill Road. Now, that section was not included in our initial phase of work. And so we've been kind of monitoring that location. And what I left that in for is just in case. We anticipate needing to add an additional phase for Monument Hill Road because at this point that is a T intersection with a stop control, and we may need to look at doing some different traffic control device at that location. It wasn't warranted at the time, but we have had and seen significant growth in the future. From the time that we first designed that project to today, and so I didn't want to put money back into the pool or anything like that if at some point we found a need to do different traffic control at that intersection and sell that project short. But we didn't want to expend money that wasn't warranted at the time for that intersection.
Your options open of whether it's Monument Hill Road or Misty Acres Boulevard?
It's right at that intersection of Monument Hill Road and Misty Acres Boulevard, so it's definitely within the corridor area. But when we did that study, there was not a signal warranted, and whether that's a signal or a roundabout, then at that point we would evaluate that. So we were trying to be as thoughtful with the funding that we had at the time, and knowing that we had other projects as well that needed additional funding.
Okay. Any other questions for Jennifer or Mike on item 8B? Thank you both. Good piece of work there. Item 8C, maintenance of effort. Oh, hold on. Not a question, just a statement. Oh, a statement.
So, Mike and Jennifer, I think, just as a heads up for you, and this could come up at the board meeting next Wednesday. I apologize if you think I should say this to you privately or in an email, but I think the CAC should be aware of this as well. I think the board's next step in reviewing these very excellent charts or spreadsheets, whatever you want to call them, at some point, whether it's next Wednesday or a future month, the board is going to ask the two of you which budget year do you think you will be, that the A list, the PPRTA 2 A list, will be completely funded, which is the phrase out of the ballot measure. So which year will be the, have a mixture of A's and B's, so such that the A's are completely funded, and then you have some money left over to get to the B's. So which year do you think that's going to be? Not asking you to answer that now, but just a heads up that you might be asked that as early as next Wednesday. Great information. Mike and Jennifer, when do you think that transition year is going to be? Is that going to be 22, 23, or 24?
Good insight. All right. Rick, you want to cover 8C is information. It's just a reminder to member governments that your maintenance of effort is coming up.
Yes, this is just a high-profile reminder to the member governments. I did send an email out to all the member government staffs on December 20, reminding them that at the February meeting, it's our norm for the member government staff, their maintenance of effort reports available. So this is just a reminder.
Item 8D, does anybody have so you get released early from the meeting if you know the numbers that go where the hash marks are. If you look at it online and opened up the spreadsheet and you know what the numbers are, speak up, yes, no. Any questions on the change orders? Anybody? Okay. Oh, did you have a question?
Do you know?
No, I don't know. But they're under the limit, so of the threshold, so
zeros.
Otherwise, they'd have brought them to us, right?
I think it was just an account change too, wasn't it? What it states on there?
Well, they say there's a contract.
Revised account code.
No, it's amount of change orders. This is
Revision of account code.
Mike, do you want to handle this?
Yeah, let me,
The description of the CO is a change in account codes. My guess is those two are the same numbers, whatever that number is, being it's a $0 value change order.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, I'm sorry, what was the question, the top?
Had a bunch of hashtags.
Oh,
So what are the dollar amounts?
there was, it was like $669 that there was, we were short on the federal side, so we had to use RTE funds, but we actually are getting more federal money, so we're going to be able to back charge and use federal money. But it was like $669.
Okay.
Okay, so the change order amount wasn't zero?
I don't think that's a change order.
No, it's just, it was shifting it from
One account
to
to
another,
another.
yeah, so that's why it's zero, okay.
Okay.
So the original contract is now $660,000 or $660 plus the $669?
No. Here's the original contract amount.
No, that's some column that says original contract amount.
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah.
So we just charged it, we
To a
just have to.
different account. You just move from
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
All right, answer Rev's question offline.
Well, you've got a column, and it says the original contract amount was $1,600,000, and for the sake of discussion, $661,000. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The column immediately to the left has a bunch of hashtags and says original contract amount. Which is it? And when I say that, you just said you were changing.
All three blocks have the same number of $1,660,000.
It's a $0 change order, it's just an account.
Counting, yeah.
It's an accounting change.
And those squares are smaller than the other one, so therefore it didn't fit and it put in hashtags. I don't know why.
Oh, yeah, that's kind of,
Or you can look at it and see that this one's probably 22 wide and the other is 18 wide.
yeah. So we didn't change the contract amount. We just coded it to RTA.
Slide the little cursor over the bar and it widens up the numbers up here. There you go. Any questions for Mike? Okay, good. Thank you. Thanks, Mike, for that excellent clarification. Item 9A, recent board actions. Rick?
Memos in your packet. Any questions?
Having seen none, 9B, definitions of capital and maintenance. our long-awaited
Yes,
sheet.
after working on this for several months with the city staff and county staff, and then I previewed it with the board chair and the vice chair last month, and they preferred that this be, instead of a board policy, that it be called an administrative guideline. So that's what is on your agenda for your review and comment.
Tom?
So would the spine road be in general notes then? Because they seem to be very quiet on the issues that we've been arguing about. I'm sorry, discussing. Sierra Madre doesn't fall into any of these categories either.
Could I make a comment?
Sure.
Tom, Sierra Madre was addressed, I don't know, 5 years ago when we talked about a bridge, okay? And I said at that time, I made it very clear to Kathleen, a former city employee, that we weren't doing anything to Sierra Madre under any circumstances. Sierra Madre has come back to haunt us, and I will address it next month, okay? Not just Sierra Madre, but another road and another intersection, and now a bus terminal that's going to be involved. So,
So your first one is Spine Road. So from memory, that was capital in roadway safety and traffic operations?
Yes.
So roadway and safety and traffic operations is a named capital project, number one?
It's not named in the ballot.
It's a program.
It's a program fund of which projects are then using
No.
those funds for, which we've had discussions, and the board seems to be confused that a project under a program thing needs to be on the A list, and that's not true. The project fund is on the A list, and then they designate projects under that fund.
I'll be glad to, maybe you want to postpone this a month, and I can research it since I don't have good recollection of the two items you're mentioning, so I could easily research it and bring that back next month.
Rick, can I ask real quick, is guideline intended to be the same kind of a word as intent?
Sure.
Yeah,
It's kind of what I figured.
yeah.
Well, and let me, go ahead, Tom, finish your.
Well, I don't think they clarified the issues that have been heartburn. I think that they spent a page with ink on it and talked about all the obvious things.
Okay.
Yeah, I think in this case, I think it was done. I don't think they solved the problem. We conveniently agreed to put it into a program and all of that, but we all felt kind of yucky after we got done with that decision.
Not all.
Not all of us. Right.
Needed a shower.
Tony didn't feel bad.
It's a good road, by the way.
I look at some of these, and you look at a street that gets basically blown up. They dig it 8 feet down, and they call it maintenance. I mean, it doesn't pass the common sense test.
Well, in terms of making it guidance, there was, I don't know, we had 10 or 15 minutes of discussion with the lawyer, the chair and the vice chair, Rev and I, and the folks at the pre-meeting about where to point this without tying the hands of the member governments in terms of, because you can't possibly list everything that you might think you're going to do with the money and where it would go, and that there may be some gray areas. And the discussion is that we need some kind of guideline so that where we're in that gray area, how far do we go into it before we kind of draw the line? I mean, is that?
Yes.
And so there was a lot of discussion about what to do about that and where. They recognize, like we do, that there are some things that are in those shadows and in the gray area. So we'll see what their reaction is to goes forward and see if they accept these categories as finite or generally accepted. I won't say accounting principles, because then Bev's hair goes up, but
Just on the back of the
but as general guidelines for how we spend the money. So
Intent.
there was a lot of discussion in that meeting on this with the lawyer and the other two guys that are, one of them's a lawyer anyway. So.
Lawyer explains the reason for guidelines. That's all you had to say was lawyer.
I don't-
Intent, guideline,
I don't know that she brought it up.
program. It's all fuzzy. That's what it's there for.
Do you want me to take a month and go back and research Tom's two items?
I'm open to you guys. We can see what the board says, or we can debate it among ourselves next meeting and then take it forward. What's the consensus? Scott?
I'm fine taking it forward the way it is, but I would maybe clarify that named capital projects includes the city's program funds, just so that there's...
Including program funds or
Yes.
something, so that we don't get it into line item A specific projects. Anybody have a problem with that? Carlos?
Yeah, and just, gosh, I'm not sure exactly, like I said, without relitigating the Spine Road project, again, it was intended to be a congestion mitigation. I mean, it is a capital project, but it was congestion relief at Austin Bluffs in Nevada. So I'm not sure exactly how, that's why I kind of like guidelines. There is a judgment call with this. It wasn't just that, hey, we're building a brand-new road in the middle of nowhere, to connect a new neighborhood. This was intended to be a congestion relief, again, in Austin Bluffs, Nevada, and it was 20% the cost of doing something at that intersection. So, again, I'm not sure exactly how we can address that, but that was kind of the rationale behind the support of Spine Road. It wasn't just in isolation within the project boundaries. It provided, this benefit to an existing intersection that needed congestion relief. So, again, how we deal with that, I'm not sure, but I want that to be part of maybe if we're going to go back and review this, that reviewing projects in isolation is not something I'm comfortable with doing. There needs to be a more holistic approach when we're dealing with maintenance and capital. So, and I realize there's many ways to look at this, and I think we had some very good discussion on that. It's not cut and dried. So
Right.
that was really my point. Thank you.
Tony?
I agree wholeheartedly with what Carlos just said, and I think that's why, some of this language is going to be intentionally fuzzy. It's not because they can't come up with an answer so much as coming up with an answer can really cause problems in the future, giving a black and white answer. There are so many different possibilities that come about as construction needs come up, as traffic needs come up. We cannot possibly predict everything, so having a list that attempts to predict everything doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. So we get the ones that we know, and we leave some fuzzy room for the ones that we don't.
I'm up for discretionary spending when it's my own money. When it's somebody else's, I'm pretty black and white.
Okay. Brian?
Yeah, and I have to agree. I actually appreciate Tom saying it, because it's there's been a lot of discretion with other people's money taken by not only this body, but specifically by the board in the past. The spine issue, yeah, I agree. It was congestion mitigation, but it was a problem that was created. It wasn't a problem that was supposed to have been dealt with by this body or the RTA. It was created by the city and by the university, and they should have dealt with it. But that's an old issue. We've discussed that over and over again. The issue I see with the fuzziness is the issue that always exists with the fuzziness. It leaves it open for interpretation and abuse of other people's funds. And granted, we're all taxpayers. And we should discuss it, and that's the thing that's important, is that people don't use precedents as a way of shutting down discussion, as has been done. So in this particular case, I'm comfortable with Jim doing what he believes needs to be done. I just don't want to see the robust, open discussion that we usually have at this body shut down simply because we adopt a guideline. And that we continue to discuss these ideas, because as we've seen today as a perfect example, once we got all the information out, we had a unanimous vote on something that was kind of contentious when it started. So I think that we should allow Jim to do what he believes is necessary in this particular. They had a good round about it, discuss it with a lawyer, which I won't discuss, but and they came up with this. So I'm comfortable with it. I just don't want to see it utilized as a way of saying, oh, well, we voted on this, and, we don't have to discuss it.
And if I might add on that note, please, while it's still in my active gray matter, the discussion of fuzziness did come up with the chair and the vice chair, and that's where they look for us in our discussions, and it looks for them as the board to make that final decision, and that discretion comes up. And we talked about that the totality of, we've talked about a number of times, of accountability to the public. They make the decisions, we make the recommendations, they make the decisions. They're accountable. And so that's the reason they chose to kind of go with guidelines, so that they had some wiggle room and leeway in some of that decision and that discussion. And so so the point taken was that was one of the things that was discussed. So, Mike?
Okay, so yes, so I think...
Joan, I'm sorry, hold on, Mike. Joan had a question. I apologize, Joan. You're on, kiddo. There you go.
Okay. No, I concur with what you're saying. We've been discussing this for more years than I want to count. And I have no fear that robust discussion will ever be limited in this body of all type A personalities. So I think we have no problem there. I think it's a case where, are we ever going to have perfect definitions? No. Have we beat this dead horse? Yes. Is it time to put this dead horse in the ground? Yes. Thank you.
All right.
I'd just like to reiterate, so, this was a good exercise because there have been questions as to what is a capital versus maintenance work effort. This is not an attempt to try to define projects like the Spine Road, like you mentioned, Tom, and Sierra Madre. I think what I want to reemphasize, not only myself as the engineering manager, but, Travis Easton, we have said and made a commitment. We're going to come and talk to the board if we have an idea, if we have some thought of kind of, gray area or, innovative finance. We'll come and talk to you before. Those other projects were kind of sprung on you and sprung on me to some degree, and we've made a commitment that we won't do that. Case in point, Peterson Road in Dublin. It was like, it's a B list, but we want to work on the intersection, which was it. We came and talked and said, what do you think? And we got a direction. So I just want to emphasize that we're not, and I'm not looking at trying to find some way to skirt the system, but I also don't want to be hamstrung where we're so strict that we start operating like the federal government and don't get anything done.
Oh, God, no.
So that's why we Rick and I and Jennifer, we talked about what is a fair, guidelines that Rick can help us stay within the intent of, the voter and all that, but also let us get stuff done. But when it comes to projects and controversial use of the funding, we're going to come and talk to you before we actually do it. And that's all. I just wanted to mention that.
Right. So in the interest of not kicking the cow any longer, we'll move on to 9C.
Make steaks.
Annual report, CAC to the board. Tom had mentioned to me, he left some of his notes at home. He's going to So we started with last year's letter, and I added some things. So I would like to ask what you guys think about, if you look at the letter, starting at about line 11, where the word "looking down the road." Given the information that Jennifer and Mike have provided in their forecast, I would consider changing this letter to say, looking down the road, we are excited that the projects being, the progress being made by the member governments may allow us to fully fund all A-list projects, I was hedging on that, not knowing what those lists were, but the point of this was begin to let the public know that we're looking at getting to B-list projects. Last year's annual report showed actually no completed projects, if I'm correct. There were some.
Dublin.
Dublin.
A small one.
But the board, and particularly Councilman Williams, has brought up that when he looked at the annual report, when he was there, we hadn't completed anything. So I wanted to kind of change this to say, hey, we are looking at some completions. We've now gotten some forecasts. We are looking at that long range, and we're predicting, we're excited based on what we knew that we may. So I'm just proposing, what do you guys think, or do you want to leave it as it is?
I like the rewording. It's also safer.
I was showing some excitement on our part that we're seeing progress by the member governments. That was kind of my thinking. So anybody have any problem with that? Okay.
I'm not remembering, in your revised wording, did you end the sentence with a year?
I did. It goes down by the end of 2022. I may need to change that to 23.
Well,
end of 2022. And I used the word funded, I think, to fully fund the A-list projects by that day. So that's the key word there. So may, the word may.
Mike and Jennifer.
May is very helpful.
Mike and Jennifer, are you comfortable with that?
You may change 2022 to 2023?
Yes. Well. What?
Yeah, I've been at this a while. I was through the first one. I mean, I think we want to be optimistic, but, and a partial answer to Rick's question earlier, when do you think we'll be fully funded? The reality is, we have to be careful until the last few major projects are bid. I think we have to be careful if we make predictions. Now, if we have several smaller projects that, even if we bid them and they come higher and we thought, if it's a $2 or $3 million project comes in a little higher, that's one thing. But if it's, some of these, $10, $20 million, so I'd be hesitant. I'm going to be hesitant to give a year.
Okay, so I can strike that and just leave it approved by RTA 2 and then leave it without a year on it.
Yeah, because the reality is if current trends continue as far as funding and expenses, revenue, and also cost, inflation, I still think, we might be done by the end of 23, but,
right.
Am I going to, I wouldn't, I said that's
I'll modify that based on this. Is you guys okay with me doing that? Yes. Okay, all right.
But I think to try to predict a year that we're going to jump to the B list, I think is a little premature.
Okay, note accepted. Yeah, Joan?
Do you want us to move forward with a recommendation that you take this forward with the changes?
Fine with me.
Oh.
Larry?
On page 2, committee membership, didn't we lose a person from Green Mountain Falls in 2019?
Nope.
Yes.
Oh, yes, Ann.
Ann, yeah.
Ann Dash.
Good catch. Sorry.
Good, good catch. Thank you.
And can you add Jim to it?
I started in January this year. No.
Well, he's not a member, though. Oh, well, not 2019.
Yep.
It's about 2019.
Any other, Tom, you going to mail any other stuff with yours?
I'll
Okay.
get it to you later.
Okay. All right, Joan?
Would move recommendation of Jim's report with the corrections and additions made.
Second.
Brian? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. 9D, staff field report. Rick's excellent riding around town.
Yes, a lot of miles. Any questions?
What does the word duplicate mean?
A duplicate entry in
Their spreadsheet.
what they're claiming they did was a duplicate location.
Okay.
Aha!
They listed the same location twice.
Okay.
Interesting.
There is a
Tom?
PPRTA sign sitting on the north side of Baptist Road, by the way, from work last year or the year before, whenever it was done, when you're out driving around.
Okay. Thank you. West of I-25?
The several items you listed as snow-covered, do you have any reason to
Doubt?
have doubts on them?
No.
Okay.
All right, any other questions on that? Item 10, agenda topics for next meeting. Carlos?
Yes, sir. I'd like to add as an agenda topic at some future date, the intermodal transportation plan. As soon as that kicks off, I think it would be beneficial for this organization to have a kind of what that plan is, what's going to be contained in that. I think it would be very useful also to get a kind of a briefing, also how this interplays or as part of Plan COS. I did ask Todd Frisbee, I don't know if he's left, I asked him briefly if he was okay. I'm adding more work for him, and he said he could support something like this. So I'm going to request that when it kicks off.
When it's appropriate, not necessarily.
When it's appropriate, yeah, I don't know when. It still has to be approved by the board. There's still some preliminaries, but when the public input process begins, prior to that, this would be very good for us to be able to hear what's going to go into this plan.
Okay. Who, you?
Yeah.
Oh.
And then I have one.
There is a new intersection, or I just noticed it, being created on Cimarron from America the Beautiful Park. How is it being funded? Who's funding it? 2C or what? This is actually, I don't know who to address the question to.
You talking about the cul-de-sac that already exists just before you get to the bridge? Or just after the bridge?
But it's coming out of the is a cul-de-sac.
It's a developer? Developer fund.
There was no sign.
Rick?
The new website is live.pprta.com.
All right.
Spread it around. Get people to use it.
Okay. Item 11, communications. Anybody got anything you want to talk about? Seeing none.
I just have one very brief comment.
Yes, ma'am.
My nose is cold. Could we up the heat next month?
We'll speak to management. All right. We'll call the meeting adjourned. Thank you all for your attendance and participation. Have a great day.
Hey, Rick. Sorry, different Rick.
Hoofda.
Two things. Number one,